Good afternoon. My name is Madhav Durbha. I'm Vice President of Supply Chain Strategy at Coupa Software. On behalf of Indo-American Community Services, I'm honored to welcome you to Day 2 of 2022 Leadership Conference. This year's conference theme is Must-Win Battles. I'm excited to moderate this panel discussion on the topic of staying ahead of supply chain traffic jams. Before I welcome our esteemed panel, I would like to talk briefly about Indo-American Community Services, in short form, IACS. The mission of IACS is to increase diversity in workplaces and provide a leadership networking platform. IACS hosts annual leadership conferences, entrepreneur conferences, women leadership events, and virtual career expos, young leaders programs, student internship programs, and mentoring programs to foster leadership. It is great to be associated with IACS for all the impactful programs they host. Now I would like to welcome our esteemed panelists. Before we get to our panelists, I just wanted to set the context for today's conversation. Supply chains. I had been in the business of supply chains for 24 years in the supply chain technology space. Supply chain was always taken for granted. We order stuff and it magically shows up. And we never have to worry about where it is coming from and all that good stuff. It's like electricity. You turn on the switch and you expect the lights to function, right? So same thing with supply chain. And for the longest time, finance organization assumed supply chain is an ATM machine. You could go there to draw cash when you need it. When you want productivity savings, you go to supply chain. And how much has changed in the last 2 years? We were dealing with a pandemic and transportation congestions, labor shortages, raw material shortages, and changing consumption patterns on the demand side. And all of this happening simultaneously, and then a geopolitical conflict to deal with. When you put all this together, the supply chain executives these days have to juggle multiple balls at the same time and drive decisions in these challenging times. So with no further delay, I'd like to get to today's discussion. And I just wanted to set this context on why staying ahead of these supply chain traffic jams is a must-win battle. With that, I have the honor to introduce our panelists. So let's go one by one. So let's start with you, Vas. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, what you do, and let's go from there.
Okay, thanks, Madhav. And also want to thank everyone that joined today. I know it's going to be a long weekend and it's a Friday afternoon, but we do appreciate you all joining to listen to us. As Madhav said, it is an interesting topic. It's an exciting time. So before we jump in, let me introduce myself. My name is Srinivas Veeramasaneni. Since we have two Srinivases here, I decided to go by Vas. I was born and brought up in India and came to the US to do my PhD in engineering. And after my graduation, I joined USG Corporation. Just a few seconds on USG Corporation, if you're not familiar with the company. We are a leader in the building material industry with 120 years history, always headquarters in Chicago, and with more than 50 manufacturing locations in US, Canada, and Mexico. Innovation has always been in our DNA. We not only innovated with new products, but also models in supply chain for the last 100 years. Every decade, this company has done something new in the building material space. In my current role, I've been with the USG for 24 years. And in my current role, which is in the last three and a half years, as a CTO, I have several shared function responsibilities, including R&D, engineering, supply chain, and marketing. I'm excited to be here today.
Great to have you, Srinivas. And that's quite a wide range of responsibilities, I must say. So great to have you on the panel. So with that, let's switch to you, Greg. So tell us about yourself and your company.
Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Friday. I'm sure many of you are looking forward to the weekend, but thank you for joining us today. I'm Greg Powell. I'm one of two presidents at WinPak. WinPak's a billion-dollar fully integrated manufacturer of sophisticated packaging that we use to supply perishable food, beverage, pharmaceutical, medical, and personal care industries. We have several platforms that include multi-layer blown and cast films, thermoformed and injection molded plastics, thin gauge foil laminated pouch, and sachet film structures. So our packaging ranges from brands like you might have heard with Pringles cups and lids for your Pringles potato chips, through to a wide variety of yogurt lidding, the Keurig branded coffee pods, coffee creamers, cups and lids, and all sorts of medicine packaging that you all have in your homes. And I can almost guarantee that you touch our products every single day. So you may not have heard of WinPak, but you're interacting with our products almost every day, and in most cases, several times a day. So I'm happy to be here. I've been with WinPak for 4 years now. I came from Sunoco. So in total, I've been in the packaging industry, industrial and consumer packaging industry for 20 years, and I spent the last 12 years of that working in a variety of general management and presidential roles. So look forward to speaking with you all today.
That's great, Greg. Next time when I take my Pringles chips, I will think of WinPak for sure. It's amazing how many of these large brands are there that we as consumers may not realize, that these brands that touch us, these companies that touch us every single day and bring critical products as well as indulgements to our homes. So that's great to have you on the panel. So next, let's move on to Vijay. So Vijay, tell us about yourself.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Madhav, and happy Friday to all of you. Name is Vijay Janapati. I'm with Broadcom, and Broadcom makes semiconductors and software, and I'm on the semiconductor side. I've been with the company for 25 years in various roles: engineering, marketing, mergers, acquisitions, and now as a general manager of one of the divisions. So great to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Glad to have you, Vijay. So let's start the discussion with you. When we think about the last 2 years, semiconductor chips were the big talk. Especially when I think back to last year and so on, automotive companies had to shut down their production lines because of the chip shortage. One thing that also brought to attention this last couple of years is the lot of concentration risk hidden in the semiconductor industry in general. So give us some context. Tell us how we got to the point where we are at with the semiconductor chips and the shortages that we faced.
Yeah, and I think great question. So semiconductor, we are not new to cyclical behavior, right? We've seen this many times in the past, but I think there are some unique things that sort of happened this time, which probably amplify the signal, if you will, right, a little more. So first and foremost is the demand, right? Typically, in usual cycles that we had in the past, we would have one or two drivers, right? But this time it was very unique in the sense that there were multiple drivers for semiconductors, right? And I'll go through a few. First up is public cloud, right? We all know the secular trend of move from a private data centers to a public cloud phenomenon that's been happening through the cloud service providers. Second, once in 10 years, you're going to get this telecom bubble. It's 4G 10 years ago is 5G now, right? And so with that, the telecom spend, as well as the terminal spends, like, phones, etc., has also come in at the same time, right? The third big one is AI. I think AI eventually runs on some silicon, right? And as much as software engineers think it just runs on in air, it doesn't, right? There's a silicon underneath that drives all of that. And there has been a tremendous amount of innovation that has happened, and a lot of silicon spend going towards the AI aspect of it, right? And then, as you mentioned, automotive. Out of all those, actually, automotive has been the smallest of the drives, right, towards in a magnitude wise. But you have these connected cars. I think one of the auto companies was making a joke that they could actually sell a car without a tire, but they cannot sell a car without a connected features in it, right? So I think last but not least, from a demand standpoint, is COVID really forced a lot of people to work from home, and then that led to a huge broadband, right? Everybody I know, including me, we all upgraded our broadband at home, right? And that drove a lot of demand side equation, right? Now, these 5 or so factors are a bit more than what has happened in the past. On the supply side, the capex required continues to grow, right? Today, any good fab takes about a $10 billion capex, and that's really not kept up, right? And also, a lot of the foundries did not really invest in earlier nodes, and so there we got caught in that supply issue, right? And I think I'm sure you'll talk about some of the labor shortages that affected everything, right? Not just semis. But during this time, I think customers, with all of this demand supply imbalance, have also changed their inventory behavior, right? What in semis we know as a just-in-time inventory kind of became a just-in-case inventory, right? Now, I think, if you can get hold of the part, just, get it, right? And so these are some of the factors, right? Demand, supply, labor, and inventory behaviors that just created this perfect storm, if you will. Okay. And just to quickly touch on your point, unlike, semiconductors are not typically something that you take out one part and put another part, right? It doesn't really work that way. There are long design cycles, long qualification cycles, and hardening cycles associated with it. And so it's not easy to just take out a part and put another one, especially for complex semis like CPUs or accelerators and things like that, right? And especially so in the car, where the qualification cycles are pretty stringent, right? So that's what got us here.
It's quite fascinating when you think about it. Semiconductor industry, you did mention that it's a cyclical industry, and increasingly I hear this chatter about semiconductor industry is turning more secular with multiple demand streams coming at it. So there is something or other to absorb the capacity that is available. At least that's an argument that I keep hearing. So we'll get back to that, but it's quite fascinating. The other thing also is you mentioned the automotive industry as a smaller segment in the overall macrocosm of the semiconductor industry. It's fascinating how shortage of just 1 or 2 parts or critical chips can bring down an entire production line. If I think about a typical internal combustion engine car, it's got 30,000 parts, right? And you're short a few chips here and there, and the impact it can have. It just shows us how supply chains have become so deeply intertwined in today's day and age. Quite fascinating. Thanks for that. So, Greg, let's switch from semiconductor chips to potato chips, or the containers that these chips go into, or in general.
I'm going to go a bit more tactical because, some of you may remember some unusual weather we had back in February of 2021 in Texas. And the freezing temperatures were absolutely devastating to the region, and in particular, the impact it had on the petrochemical industry. And it really brought things to an abrupt stop. And even those of us that had the strongest inventory positions suffered. And in some cases, the industry continues to suffer. So in our case, this showed up in almost every area of our films business and thermoforming business, from polypropylene and polystyrene resin supply to colorants, to additives and inks and solvents and hot melts. And there's still a tail on that that's still a bit residual as our suppliers have come up out of force majeure events. In our case, we were quite fortunate, if not lucky, because we'd spent much of 2020 working to diversify our polypropylene and styrene supply bases. And we'd strategically stockpiled some material ahead of the 2020 hurricane season. And then we're lucky not to have much of an event in 2020 from a hurricane standpoint. And we'd also had a time where there was relatively low resin prices at that time. So it was a good time to stockpile with very low resin costs, okay? So we're taking advantage of the market pricing at that time. And then with the weak hurricane and the rear mirror, we came into this freeze in a good position. So as the force majeure events rolled out and the heavy sales allocations went into place, we were really in a very good position, okay? So many of our competitors suffered more than we did, and we can call that lucky, but there's a key learning in that because we were able to supply at a high level, and that put us in a strategic position. So really, in the end, we're carrying that same philosophy forward now of seeing our investments in inventory, even while resin prices are relatively high, as a strategic advantage. And that's allowed us to gain significant growth and market share. So as I look at it, it's a must-win battle to look at inventories as a strategic advantage and to avoid putting yourself in a place of complacency and a place of comfort where you might otherwise be comfortable with sole source, long-term and financially advantageous supply situations.
What's interesting in that story that you're sharing about the Texas winter storm and how your inventory buildup has helped you, one thing to take away, this is the point I was making earlier, supply chains are not just about cost play. And Greg, in the example you're sharing, you're able to actually gain market share during that time, right? Because you had the product availability, which your competition did not have. So this is one reason why I was just parsing through some 10K statements recently of some publicly traded companies just to see how many times supply chain is mentioned. On average, what I found out was about 25 to 35 times the word supply chain appears in 10K. So it just highlights the strategic importance, and thanks for sharing that. So
I'll get to a very different story when we get to the end and a bit later in the panel, because it's not all rosy. So you get lucky sometimes and other times you don't. So
why don't you tell us that story right now? Let's hear it.
I'm going to save it because it's directly related to carbon taxes and what happens when you see these sorts of things shift. So we'll get to that.
Oh yeah, we'll get into sustainability and carbon footprint and ESG, all that good stuff. So that's great. So Srinivas, you are in the construction industry. You're catering to that industry. As I understand, the products that you make, once again, each of us may not recognize USG immediately, but we all touch and feel your products, I guess, every single day, right? So when I think about your supply chain, it's highly distribution intense. You have bulky materials that you need to move, all modes of transportation, all corners of the country or the world and whatnot. So tell us about the challenges you faced, specifically in the context of American Trucking Association released a report saying that we are 80,000 truckers short in United States. And by 2030, that's expected to go to 160,000. So in light of that labor constraints, especially when it comes to trucking, so if you can double click as well in your response on that, that'd be great.
Thanks, Madhav. And as I'm listening to both Vijay and Greg, that's good. I'm answering after both of them, because you can see we are not semiconductors, but we are sheetrockers. That's our brand name, actually. We just celebrated our 100th year anniversary of our brand name. To your point, as both Vijay and Greg said, we experienced all three of those, like the COVID, the effect of labor, then the winter storm that happened in February, March 2021, and then demand for the products. So obviously, all of them happened at the same time that created these unprecedented type of supply chain challenges. When I was reflecting back, okay, these are all good, but how you do react to it, act to it, and what we have done, what are the things that happen? Let me put it into two different categories. One, like as Greg said, the raw material side. Because of this winter storm, suddenly all of the petroleum byproducts, were either not available anymore. I think Greg was able to do, has this inventory and is able to survive and did really well. But because of the force majeure, we didn't get the raw materials to do some of our product formulations. This is where it's not only about one part of the functional team. When you work together as a team, manufacturing, R&Ds, and then as well as the supply chain together, we're able to reformulate, we're able to immediately adjust and adopt to be able to do better than the competition. This is what we always say with us is, to win the game, you got to do better than your competition. I think our teams, because of working together, raw materials, we were able to find solutions, either optimizing the raw material that we are using or finding other raw materials that can do the same functionality. And that's how we are able to do just on the raw material side, like as Greg mentioned. And second part of the raw material side is, a lot of these vendors that we get raw materials are small players in the market. For they had these trucking problems because we being a bigger company and have bigger footprint, in fact, we partnered with some of these vendors and we helped them to supply the materials to our plants. Even in these things, some of these bright spots will help us, I think, to strengthen our partnerships, and then they see USG as a long-term leader in the business and they want to work with us. Now moving to the transportation side, as you said, we use all forms of all the modes of transportation, either truck, rail, ship, barge, you name it, we use all of them. Coming to both this truck and rail, which I believe are the biggest challenges we have seen in the last 18 months or even before, particularly on the truck, as you mentioned, I think it started even before the COVID happened, because you go back maybe 5 years, 10 years back, a truck driver sees as a very good middle-class job. You get a very good salary or income, and you can actually raise your family here. But over the years, now finding it out, I think that's not the case, because few things. One, if you go on a long-term drive, you may not come back for 3-4 days, for you're not actually spending time with your family. And there are other alternate technologies came in like Uber, etc. For they have other job opportunities. They can go and earn the same money maybe than driving a truck. But they are having alternate opportunities for them too. So there are a lot of truck drivers left maybe the profession, and that's why these 80,000 jobs open, and they're not able to find people to actually do it. Same thing happened on the rail side too. They not only actually a lot of people resigned or retired, and they're not able to bring back. The complexity of this is, which we are seeing even after the COVID happened, even in the last 6 months, when they're hiring, they're having more than 40 to 50% attrition, so they're not able to keep people on the rail side. For between these two, both truck and rail, some of the things that USG and the team has done a great job. Obviously, there's a very talented young team we have, and I just want to highlight a couple of them. One, recognizing long haul drivers are not available. Our team focused on maybe a 250-mile radius from our plants. There, I think you can get more truck availability. And then for a long haul, they combine both rail and the truck together. And then the third, we worked with our customers wherever possible to see if they can actually pick up our product from our plants. So it's a partnering with people, being creative and doing different things, and then even using Lean Six Sigma principles to optimize our loading and agility, bringing agility to do it. So it's a combination of things I think really helped us to make some different in the market, and really that helped us, I think, to win the game at the end now looking back.
That's quite an interesting story. And in fact, one thing that I took away from that, Srinivas, is that for the longest time in my supply chain career, it was all about how can I be the preferred supplier or how can I be the preferred carrier. The tables have clearly turned, right? In the highly constrained world that we live in. Now it's more about how can I be the preferred customer so I can get to the front of the queue when there is an allocation, or how can I be the preferred shipper so that the carriers will prioritize when they run into these shortages. And the other thing I took away is that you really help your suppliers. And at the end of the day, supply chain is not just about things moving, right? It's a people business, people connecting with each other and building lasting relationships. And those go a long way in terms of setting yourself up for success.
Yeah, and I think Vijay or Greg made a comment about supply chain is taken for granted. I think that's what I think slowly is changing right now. It is seen as an asset, and it is a differentiation. I think you got to see really that's what the advantage you have. If you look back in the 18-20 months, the agility, the way that creativity, the way we moved things really showed for our customers that this is the company that they have to do business with, isn't it? That's why now we see it as a competitive advantage.
Sure. That's music to my ears as a supply chain professional, by the way. So we are actually starting to get some audience persons here as well in the feed that I'm monitoring. So just an announcement for the audience. If you're joining through Zoom, just feel free to type your question into the chat window. You can send it to me, and then I will address it to the panelists. So one question that I see here is, maybe I'll have all three of you respond, and let's start with you, Vijay, on this one. In the future, do you see supply chain shrinking and more manufacturing done closer to where the product is consumed?
Okay, yeah, the question is the supply chain shrinking, and is it done closer to where it's consumed? So
yeah, it's more about onshoring, reshoring, and all this conversation that's going on, right? That makes the supply chain shorter.
Right now, if you kind of, if you've been following the press, right, for the last year or so, you see an incredible amount of support coming from various governments. It's US government, it's EU, it's China, it's Singapore, India, a lot of them realizing that semiconductor supply chain or semiconductor supply is a critical part, and all investing, right? And if you look at even the private sector, hundreds of billions of dollars are committed now for long capex. I do not see supply chain shrinking. In fact, I think actually supply chain is expanding fairly rapidly at this current stage. Maybe we haven't seen the output yet, but there is a lot of money put into the ground as we speak to build up supply chain, right? Then second, is the supply closer to where the demand is? Yes, there is some onshoring, as we know in the US, right? But semiconductor is a fairly global situation, right? There are chips designed, say, for example, in California. They're manufactured in Taiwan or Korea, or sometimes in the US. They're assembled in Korea or China or Singapore. They're tested in a different place. And so it's a very, very global phenomena. I don't know if that is going to change, right? There are lots of centers of excellence. Typically, semiconductor makers are going to go towards where the capacity is and where the expertise is, right? And today it is very, very widespread in the industry.
Great.
So I want to add, sorry, Madhav.
Go ahead.
I want to just add to Vijay. Even in the building material, it's an interesting question. Obviously, we want to be closer to the customer because it's about the cost. You have to be the lowest cost, delivered cost-wise to compete in the market. So you would like to have a broader network. Yes, I think everybody is trying to build more plants so that we are close to the customers. But I do agree with Vijay because this is not a one answer for all of them. You may actually increase your manufacturing locations, but you have to have more sustainable, resilient, I think, supply chain is what is needed, I think, even going to the future. Let me give you a quick example. We make a product that goes into the modular buildings. And I was surprised to learn last year that product is actually shipped to Poland. And then they are actually putting the boxes in Poland. Then they are shipping that to Toronto and New York to put it into hotel rooms. So that's what the supply chain means. We may be thinking we are doing it here and then sending it to the customer, but there are so many changes and permutations and combinations. So I agree with Vijay, that is two things are going to continue to happen, I think. That is, people will build more manufacturing locations, try to bring in closer to the customer, but the creativity of about the final product and the solution may happen differently. That's why we need the supply chain, I think.
Got it. Yeah, and Greg, what are your thoughts?
I think there's several factors that are going to play a role in the insourcing. I think there's a lot of desire to insource and shorten the supply chain itself. But it's going to come down to fairly practical investment-based considerations, things like capital intensity, the strategic nature, and what a country or a government considers strategic versus non-strategic from an industry standpoint. The regulatory environment, it may be something that you would want to onshore, but then the country's regulatory environment is not friendly to bringing it onshore. And then finally, we're going to have things like the demand volatility, the demand pattern, and rate of change or innovation that's going to play into it. So I think there's a fundamental desire to bring things closer, but it's not that simple, right?
No, you hit the nail on the head. This is something I do consult with lots of large corporations, and yeah, there are practical considerations, Greg, exactly to your point, and also Vijay, in terms of, the government incentives have a role to play, right? And what governments are willing to invest into these things. So the thing though is, from a supply chain professional perspective, what we see is that as the supply chain shrink, it reduces the variability in terms of the lead times, in terms of speed to market will be that much faster. So obviously it is a desirable outcome, but you have to balance that against tax structures, labor availability, especially highly skilled manufacturing when you get into semiconductor and so on and so forth, right? It also comes down to exercising that muscle on an ongoing basis, and which pockets of the world have those competencies. All these factors become important. So if we have our way, everything will be produced right at the point of consumption. Maybe like a 3D printing would help there to a degree, but there are practical considerations. So there is another question that's coming up from the audience. As governments look to diversify supply chains, they will build robustness. A consequence of that is increased supply and cost from reduced efficiency. Do you see increasing costs for the end product? I guess it ties back to the notion of optionality. As you build more and more sources, as you start building more diversity, does it increase the cost structure? And accordingly, we as consumers, what we pay for the end product, is that going to be passed on to us? I guess is how I'm interpreting that. Who wants to take this one?
Yeah, I think it certainly will be. I think that's there's going to be a point, and again, it's going to depend on the area, but there's going to be areas where people are certainly willing to pay for that proximity, the convenience, and there's trade-offs. Things like, would I rather have things closer, but have less inventory? So if I've got a high change product line and I don't want to carry a strategic level of inventory, it's worth something to me to have that supply chain closer.
Yeah, just want to add to Greg. One is, my view is maybe slightly different in the say is, at the end of the day, it's all about the customer willingness to pay for what he's getting the value, isn't it? An example, if you make the same quality of the product, then even you bring in from outside or here, then people have a choice. We have a product here in the US. There's a product that comes from China that's 20% cheaper right now. There are people that just cost focused may just buy that. But the people that want the quality and the assurance that they want, they're going to pay for the premium, and then they will buy our products. I believe that's what happens is it's at the end, it is about the customer, what he's looking for.
And also, is it fair to say that some products are more price sensitive? Some categories are more price sensitive and others are not so. It really depends on which segments of the business, which parts of your portfolio also has got a sensitivity to that, I would assume. Vijay, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, the good points, right, on all the quality and, and the fact that there is a reason to charge or even get a premium for those things, right? Those definitely make sense. There are certain markets where, it's absolutely also a government or even a regulatory, some sort of a restriction that you have to do here, like if you're manufacturing for defense and things like that, right? But notwithstanding all those, for a similar like product, it would be unsustainable over a longer period of time to expect that the consumer is actually going to, or a customer is actually going to pay that premium over a sustained period of time, right? What the government incentives can potentially do is to catalyze an economies of scale to happen where you would actually get either close or same cost structure that you can get from somewhere else, right? Either because you run more efficient or more, even though the labor markets are more expensive, potentially you could make that up with an efficiency. And for that, an economy of scale needs to sort of kick in, right? And so it remains to be seen if the government incentive is going to catalyze that or not, right? If it doesn't, then it is not going to sustain, right? And hopefully we all want that to catalyze into an economy of scale that allows the cost structure to be close to equal, right?
Yeah, Vijay, sorry, Madhav, if I can add to Vijay's point, I think that's where, in my view, innovation steps in, I think, because Vijay is right. If it is the same quality, why people continue to pay high premium, isn't it? If the same quality, when I have the option to buy at a low cost. So that's where I think the industries has to think differently, whether it's a government subsidies or even we got to come up with automation or do something different. Otherwise, you cannot survive, isn't it? If somebody able to produce the same quality at a lower cost and able to do it, then the company or the sector has to think differently, I think. In my view, that's where the constraints has to drive innovation. You got to think differently. If you go back 10, 20 years, why some of the companies move away from US was we thought labor cost is higher and therefore we thought, okay, labor cost is going to be cheaper in other countries. Now we are bringing back. Is it we are bringing back because it's going to be more expensive? I don't think so. We got to think differently to see how we can, the cost can happen.
Yeah, you touched on a very important point, Srinivas, the role of automation, right? So especially where there is a possibility, bringing in automation does help create some level of cost arbitrage, right, between different pockets of the world. Of course, it raises ethical questions around, does it increase the gap between haves and have-nots? How do you upskill certain parts of the society or certain parts of the workforce so that they are ready for this type of a change, right? As opposed to loading production lines, now I need to become a robot troubleshooter, right? Or robotics operator, so on and so forth. So how do you upskill that labor? Also, it's as leaders in our organizations, something that for us to think about and worry about as well, I'm sure. So we tackled the question about shrinking of supply chains and collapsing the distance between nodes through nearshoring and all that. Adjunct to that comes another topic, which is carbon footprint. For example, that nearshoring drives obviously certain benefits in terms of your sustainability. You're reducing carbon footprint. You're not flying or coming on boats from halfway across the world, right? So when I think about that, Greg, maybe I'll come to you on this. When I think of sustainability, you being in packaging industry, sustainability is extremely important. Now, when I look at government, geopolitics come into this as well, right? When I look at US government's Inflation Reduction Act these days, there were provisions there around, environmental justice around underserved communities. And then when I look at German Supply Chain Act, Germany is tightening the regulation in terms of holding companies that do business in Germany accountable for their Suppliers Act, whether they are humanitarian, child labor related concerns, judicial, environmental, etc. So I want to talk about how these sustainability initiatives and geopolitics are intersecting. You being in packaging industry, I thought you might have a perspective on this.
Yeah, and I think in the interest of time, I'm going to only stick with the first letter in the acronym called environmental. And the reason, because, there's probably some people on the call that are looking at me in a strange way because of their feelings about packaging and specifically plastic packaging. And there's a bit of an ethical and moral dilemma there. So I'm going to start with a little bit of an advertisement for why plastics is actually a good solution. and how that relates to food waste. Then I'll drop into a couple other things and implications that relates to the supply chain. Okay, otherwise we'll never finish, and it's such a huge topic. So if we think about the top 3 causes of greenhouse gas emissions, those are, the industrial use themselves, the production of things. We then have agriculture, forestry, and land use, and then transportation. So that makes up about 60% from a sector standpoint of greenhouse gas emissions. So hold on the thought with agriculture and think about food for a minute. Think about industrial use, which includes the processing of food for a minute, as well as plastics and other things. And then think about how much food gets moved across through transportation. Okay. And when you look at it that way, there's 3 assertions I'd make. 1, food waste is the much bigger problem and plays maybe one of the largest roles in greenhouse gas emissions. Secondly, plastics. Packaging plays a key role, certainly, to reducing food waste, but in particular, the characteristics you have with plastic packaging does probably the best job in many categories of providing for shelf life and avoiding spoilage until it can actually be consumed by the consumer. Okay, so when we look at the amount of food waste just in the US alone, there's over 63 million tons of food that gets thrown away. And that's before it even gets to the consumer's home or the restaurant, okay? So if we could make an impact on that through better packaging, this would be meaningful. So if you just look at some statistics around that, REFED is what I use, is food waste itself is 21% of all freshwater consumption. It's 18% croplands and occupies 21% of our landfill in volume. That's huge. So food waste is really the dilemma. It's not this plastic that we like to hate on because it's not being picked up. Okay, so if we could actually reduce the environmental costs by over $400 billion if we could use plastics more and not hate on it so much and get it back. Okay, so we could actually see a significant reduction in this. So if we look at it from that perspective, we've got a highly recyclable material that even if we don't recycle it, but use it for waste to energy. And by the way, waste to energy incineration is proving to be an effective way of actually reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So between these 2 things, there's a significant opportunity to reduce food waste and lower our greenhouse gas emissions by reclaiming and recycling plastics. Okay, so what we need there is to reframe this topic around reclamation and sortation in our local communities, and begin to try and work with this material. Otherwise, we risk starving the industry itself for the viable recycled plastics we need to do things like post-consumer recycling product. Okay, so unless we build a market by recovering this stuff, we deny the opportunity to solve the problem itself. So this is a must-win battle for to reduce food waste, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and in many ways make the planet, save the planet. Okay, so if I shift then a bit, before I leave that, I just can't stress enough that everybody should become more educated and not drink just what's being fed in the media, and do your own homework on this. And I just think there's such a tremendous important understanding that needs to be gained here by what's happening with food waste and the opportunities we're missing, and what could be done if we could solve this plastic recycling problem. But if I shift,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead, because I'm going to talk a little bit.
So maybe one argument that I hear about, or one statistic I hear about, is that by year 2050, there'll be more plastic in our bodies of water than fish, right? That's an argument that I hear. Now, when we think about reclaiming and recycling, right? How does that happen? If I consume a cup of Pringles and then throw it away in trash, how does that get reclaimed?
Chances are today it's landing in the landfill because your municipality hasn't invested in proper sortation equipment. And there's modern optical sortation processes and these sorts of things, but what's lacking is the public funding. And I'm not going to get into it right now, but there's some things with the polypropylene coalition that we're involved in to make sure that we're providing grant monies to local municipalities to make those investments, to make sure that that stuff's being recovered And we're building a market for that, because without a market, it's not economically viable to get to adopt these post-consumer wastes. So this is a government game as much as it is a public awareness game. So if I shift then to kind of, what can happen when you have government regulation involved, in September of 2021, the Chinese government dropped a punitive carbon tax in place. And some of this may have been, people speculate that it was related to cleaning up the air ahead of the Olympics and these sorts of things. But at the end of the day, this punitive carbon tax was dropped into place on businesses that were significant consumers of coal-based power generation. That effectively shut down the aluminum industry overnight until they could get worked through this and get started up into a cycle of rolling shutdowns. That created a worldwide shortage for the material and significantly extended lead times. In our case, we couldn't get our hands on thin gauge foils to make your yogurt lidding. So if anybody's wondered why they're not able to find their favorite yogurt in the grocery store, it's because of a carbon tax credit that took place back starting in September of 2021, and our inability to get that material to make your yogurt lidding. Okay, so we've seen lead times stretch from 8 to 9 weeks all the way out to 14+ weeks, and that's been devastating to our business and our customers. And we remain in a sales allocation situation. I don't think there's anything we could have done from an inventory or forecasting standpoint to prevent this. But what it underscores is, had we had a better global geographic supply diversification and been more strategic and forward-looking, we could have adjusted and reallocated where we were purchasing some of that material from and reduced the impact that had, okay? So that's significant and meaningful. And there's one final but, and that's ocean freight, okay? Because that still involves ocean freight in our case, because we have no domestic source for this. So we're heavily reliant on ocean freight. And with what's happening now with greenhouse gas emissions and the rating of the global fleet of shipping vessels, which, by the way, is only about 1.7% of the total transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions, but that's an aside. They're rating these things now. And the lower-rated vessels, quite simply, will have to slow down. So there's going to be increased competition for the more modern vessels that go faster, that would shorten that supply chain. And this is going to become a bigger and bigger problem as we move through 2023 and into 2024. So these rising freight rates, increased competition for the more efficient vessels is going to get quite interesting, and probably further aggravate the struggles we're already having with lead times and ship availability.
In fact, I hear the lead times could go up by 15% or so come 2023 with these changes. So Srinivas, thanks for those perspectives, Greg. And Srinivas, the thing is, when I look at the inflationary environment that we live in right now, obviously it's got an implication on the housing market, right? So what the future holds is pretty interesting when you think about it through the lens of where you sit. So how are you preparing for that?
Thanks, Madhu, asking that question. But before I get there, I just want to take a minute. I know it's time, but I'll take only a minute, because I saw so much passion from Craig about the sustainability. I just want to add our perspective too as a company. I agree, maybe all his passion about the things that are happening. USG as a building material, it's actually our must-win battle, sustainability. And we are focusing on 3 things. We'd like to, and we announced publicly last month, we want to reduce 30% of our carbon footprint in the next decade. We want to eliminate all red list chemicals from our products. And then we're going to have zero waste in our manufacturing plants. Oh, and then 2 comments, how we're going to do. 1, we're going to reduce weight and water in our products. When you reduce weight, it not only reduces the energy that we use at our plants, but also for transportation, we can put more product on a truck. That way, we're also helping the transportation. And the 3rd, when I say zero waste, this is where, when Greg was talking about, we have already started this in the last few years, but we're going to accelerate. We're going to bring back the waste from the construction sites, new waste, to our plants, and we're going to put it back into our products. So we're already thinking this, that is, we want to reduce the carbon. We want to make our customers' lives and health better. And the last one is circular economy. For those are the three things. I think, Greg, I understand your passion, but I think everybody has to work their portion of it to get to the destination, I think.
That's right.
Well, then to answer your question, I think Vijay mentioned semiconductor as a cyclic business. I think you all agree. Construction is also may not be exactly the same cyclic, but it has gone through in the last 120 years in this country, so many cycles. But the fundamentals are strong this time. That's what I believe personally, and that's what we believe. Because people need homes or places to either live, work, and play. Because the fundamentals are, we still have immigration, we still have household formations, and then the housing stock age is increasing. For keeping that all in mind, I do agree with interest rate change, etc. There may be small changes, but we believe still we need building and building materials in this country. Okay, what we do as a supply chain and what we are thinking about it. You mentioned, I think at the beginning, a comment, a sustainable, resilient supply chain team always has to have the right structure and the people and the tools to be able to adopt quickly and be flexible and meet the needs, I think. That's where we are actually investing and then thinking already. For we have the good structure, we have great talent, and maybe a couple of PR for you too is we are using the LlamaSoft as a network optimization. I know your company makes that software. For we are using some ML and AI tools to be able to ready and adopt quickly. And the last comment is, like I said at the beginning, this is the way that we do business is work with customers, partner with customers. If they change, if they adopt, we can also immediately change. That's the last thing we are doing is with all these tools, we are trying to work with our major customers, understand how their markets are changing and their needs are changing, and we want to adopt quickly.
Thanks for that perspective, Srinivas. So technology is one part of it, but how do you engage people into that, and how do you put the right processes in place, not just work internally, but collaborate externally as well is super critical as you look into the future. So that's great. And one thing that's also interesting is 3 very different industries, how much commonality exists between them. So maybe switching to you, Vijay. So as we look past the current situation, as people are returning to work and some of the demand patterns are again shifting and whatnot, and there is all these incentives that are playing in and ramping up manufacturing, etc. So what does the future hold? To give us a view of the future.
Yeah, and I think you touched a little bit on the inflation, right? And I think, in technology, inflation is really corrosive, right? First thing it does is it reduces your, consumers' discretionary spend, and that affects a lot of these devices that consumers buy, right? It might be a phone, it might be a gaming device, it might be something. And so we are already starting to see that effect, right? And usually the consumer behavior is the first to change, and that changes semiconductors that are purpose built for those type of use cases, right? And I think beyond that, I think the critical question is these 5 factors I outlined in the very beginning that all created that perfect storm of demand. How many of them are actually going to sustain, right? Which of those are going to sustain to what level? And some of them we believe are secular in the sense that, a move from private to public cloud would be secular. 5G adoption, we're still not, there are lots of other countries like say India and Europe still, going through that phase, and some parts of the US too, right? And AI is definitely a secular trend that we see continuing. But if you, it all depends on how the demand situation sort of shapes up, right? It is fairly evident at this stage that the consumer side is weakening fast, very quickly, right? Now, clearly on the supply side, in the last 2 years, there's been a lot of momentum and a lot of capex at work right now, right? There's so many fabs being built. Just in the US, we're talking about 10 plus fabs, and many more in Taiwan, China, Korea, etc., in different places, right? And supply definitely seems like in the next 2 to 3 years is coming up very, very fast, right, on that, right? And I think I would be remiss if I didn't say one other thing, right? Semis have always been, in a place where it was just in time, right? And as I mentioned before, we are now in just in case, right? So a lot of places you talked about in a car, they need 1,000 components, they have 998, and they can't ship the car because they don't have the 2 critical pieces. And so that's really where we are. We are in a just in case, and it will go back to just in time. And then all of that inventory will get released, right? And so how much inventory is really there in the whole chain, and how fast will it get released? These are the factors, right? So the inventory changes, the supply, coming on board now very quickly, how the demand is going to shape up, and of course, the labor market, right? How the labor markets are going to change. But generally, inflation is not a good thing for technology.
Got it. All right, great. Thank you all so much for those perspectives. One rapid fire round in the end, just to bring it home. So real quickly, each of you have been very successful in your careers and got to where you are at. If you were to go back to your 21-year-old self, or when you started your career, 25 or whatever it is, what advice would you give? Let's start with you, Srinivas.
Oh, thanks, Madhav. I think that's what I got to think in the next 3 days, going back to my 21-year-old. I think, you're making my long weekend already started now.
So this is not helping. This could be depressing.
So let me say, there may not be one. Let me share my experience. Hopefully, I'm going to list a few, 3 or 4, and that helped me. And then hopefully some of you may be already working on it. Those are the things that the people that are on this call today. One is about, you got to really have a passion about what you're working, and you got to enjoy the job or the function that you're doing. I think that's the first portion of it. I really enjoy the things that I've done in the last 25, 30 years. That's actually made it easy for me, I think. Second, all the things that we spoke today, whether Greg or Vijay and I, we cannot do alone, and we cannot do by one team. It has to be more cross-functional teams, isn't it? That's why we call it at USG, this is a team sport. So we got to know how to play the team sport well. And the next one is about the customer focus. I know people keep on saying customer focus, but this is really, doesn't matter whether it's an external or internal customer. Always think about what the others are looking for, where we are adding value. Keeping that in mind is important, I think, whether you're in supply chain or new product development. And the last, but before the last one, I want to say is about ability to take a risk and also adopt the change. I think if you're either afraid of taking a little bit of risk, or if you don't want to change will move past you. For you got to have the ability to change. And finally, the last one is always think about what is the value you are bringing to the team, to the job you're doing, what impact you are making, and focus on the outcomes. If you're not making a value and impact, I think it's time to move on.
Got it. Thank you. Greg.
So I guess I'm gonna stick to the specific supply chain topic. I guess for those that are earlier in their careers, I think this is a super rich area for people to consider spending time. So I guess I would encourage people to have the opportunity to do a rotation, 1 or 2 year assignment in one of these supply chain related areas. Do it, because it's a rich area. It's not going anywhere. There's all sorts of data analytics that are still developing in this arena, and all sorts of insights that I think would invariably serve you well further on. I think for more senior leaders, the advice around supply chain would be that we really have the opportunity to do a lot with our analytics, and we tend to focus on the procurement function, maybe not as holistically. I've been guilty of that, of the traffic, the freight, the logistics. So really checking the talent and how robust the processes are that have been deployed in those areas is something that should not be overlooked, especially right now. Great.
Thanks for that, Greg. And Vijay, bring us home.
Yeah. So just a couple of things I would say regarding career-wise and and especially in a technology, right? The first piece I would say is if you're a 21-year-old, build expertise, right? What gets you on the table is that you are an expert at something that you do. That's what brings you to the table to start with, right? And once you're on the table, that expertise won't keep you at the table for a long time or even grow your career. And I think mid-career, you start building breadth, right? You start looking at, what are some of the things that your colleagues are doing and how do I learn that? And it may be accounting, it may be marketing, it may be some other thing, but mid-career build breadth in skills, right? But I think also one other point I would say, this is more sort of behavioral or subtle one, is typically if you find what you're really good at doing, right? And a synergy, a harmony, what you would like to do, right? Oftentimes you find that we are really good at doing something, but that's not what I want to do, right?
Sure.
So if there is a harmony between those two, and to add more to that is, if that company that you're working at or the industry that you're working at really values that also on top of it, then I think you've found a perfect synergy. So it's a quest for finding that harmony of what you're good at, passionate about, and actually what you like to do and what you're good at, and and the value that provides to the company, right? So
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you
Quick
so
example
much.
is if you are a very innovative person and you really like to build leadership products, probably a company like Apple is a good place for you, right? There you'll find synergy because the company likes to build good products, great products. And if you are fantastic in supply chain, you need to go to a place where supply chain is valued, right? A lot more. Right?
Sure.
Yep, good thinking.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those perspectives. And once again, thank you. I know you all have very busy schedules, but joining us today and sharing your words of wisdom, very much appreciate that. And just a final word of thanks. Big thanks to our corporate sponsors, ITW, Dover Corporation, USG Corporation, Nordson, Sonoco, and ChampionX, and our partnering organizations, McKinsey, Expedia, Winpack, Duck Creek Technologies, Covanta. Thanks to the advisory board and the executive board and the volunteering teams. We want to thank you for your participation as well, and we look forward to seeing you next Friday, the day 3 of the conference. And the topics next Friday include changing business trends and hyper competition and sustainability. Thank you very much for staying with us and joining today's session. Have a good evening and great weekend. Thank you.